I know that when we're gathered here today on such a long and intense day of prayer, we sometimes wonder, didn't we already do that one? Right? Why are we doing this one now? I thought that one went later. You know, the prayers, unless you've grown really familiar with them, the order and the reasoning can be a bit confusing. But in truth, they are broken down into intelligible units. There are opening prayers, there are closing prayers, there are prayers of separation. There's the tefillah, the amidah, 3 times a day in communal worship. There are rituals around Torah and haftarah. And today we add, of course, vidui, confession. But what is at the core of public Jewish prayer? Where does it start? In ancient days, it starts with prayer that we speak even if we're not at the synagogue. Twice a day, evening and morning, we speak the words of the Shema. We acknowledge the unity of God out loud. We accept the responsibility to do mitzvot out loud, twice a day, every day. But there's another critical piece that we Jews promise twice a day, every day, when we recite the words of the Shema: to learn and to teach. Jewish tradition, at its core, contains an academic responsibility. Talmud Torah. The study of Torah is upon every Jew to uphold. Not only are we responsible to learn from the generations before us, but we are responsible to teach the generations that follow. Stop me if you've heard these before. Mount the words of our Torah, the section involved, on our doorposts and on our gates. Mezuzot. How many of you have one on your front door? I'm sure most everybody, if not more, inside your home. Physically bind these words, the promise, the acknowledgement of the unity of God, the promise to learn and to teach, to your body with tefillin on your arm and on your head, between your eyes. Probably not as common in a Reformed congregation. Vishinantam levanecha. Teach them to your children. Make them known when we are out and about. V'shivtecha b'veitecha uvlechtecha v'derech. You've heard this a few times before, I'm sure. Our ancient rabbis understood this obligation to apply, though, not only to the words of the Shema themselves, but to the entirety of Jewish knowledge. We all spoke or chanted these very words today, promising in public and out loud to learn and to teach. We are Jews. This is our sacred responsibility. The rabbis go so far as to say that anyone who engages in meaningless, idle chatter without including words of Torah is violating the mitzvah to speak words of Torah as a regular, fixed activity. So yes, in a sense, 24-hour cable news being 95% idle chatter is likely a violation of core Jewish principles. But we are also Americans, and we live in a secular world that is devaluing knowledge at an increasing rate. It is not a new trend in our culture, but one that we have a sacred duty to push back against. If I asked you, what would you guess the typical level of literacy is in the United States? Hold it. Keep a number in your mind. Now, we are somewhat shielded in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We are, of course, the first state to institute public education, and we happen to be the state with the highest level of child literacy, too, or at least so says the National Literacy Institute. But that same institute tells us that as of 2024, only 79% of American adults are literate. 1 in 5 adults in America is not literate. Of course, that places us well below the global rate of 86%. And there's even more to the picture, because when you drill down, 54% of American adults have a literacy below that of a 6th grade level. 20% of Americans, these are the adults, not the 4th graders, are below a 5th grade level. So roughly half the people that you meet cannot read a newspaper article in the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times. At least not for meaning. So, by my back of the envelope, if 1/5 of adults are totally illiterate and another fifth are functionally so, reading below a 5th grade level, that's really almost 40% of adults that cannot interact with written words in a meaningful way. Unless you say, oh yes, but we have so many immigrants to the United States, 66% of these adults who are illiterate were born in the US. The US ranks 36th in the world for adult literacy. I was reminded this outside of Trader Joe's last month. I don't know if you've ever, I'm sure everybody stopped in at Trader Joe's once in a while. It's the reason to come to Hyannis, I know. But I picked up a few things, and as is often the case, you'll see outside somebody tabling with ballot initiatives. Civic duty, I always go over, see what the ballot initiatives are, ask questions, see which ones I would like to sign. And that day, the gentleman who was behind the table, put another one in front of me and he said, oh, this one is to lower the state tax, by state income tax by 1%. And I looked at it and I said, I think you mean you want to lower the state income tax by 20%. He says, no, we want to lower it from 5% to 4%. I had to explain the math to a man who was older than I was, and I literally proceeded as if I was speaking to a 6th grader. Say you earned $100, and Massachusetts taxed it at 5%. The state takes 5%, and you would have $95. If you do it at 4%, the state has $4, and you have $96. The state has 20% less dollars than it did before. You would break the state. He didn't like that too much. Nonetheless, if illiteracy holds effectively around 40%, guess what a level of effective enumeracy, its math equivalence, is? The Department of Education assessment in 2020 says that our nation breaks roughly into thirds. 32% are unable to use math for much of anything beyond simple counting. 32% of adults can use it for some simple tasks, might be able to calculate a simple percentage. 36% of adults are fully functional with math for everyday uses. This is not saying that you could stop somebody on the street in that group and say, here, quick, do this differential for me. But that they are functional in the sense that they are not daunted by dealing with household finances, prices in the supermarket, savings, figuring out how to save for the future, et cetera. So roughly a third of Americans are fully functional, a third less so, and a third not at all. Signs of this effective enumeracy may include people who believe the following. COVID vaccines were ineffective. Simply an inability to read statistics and understand them. You believe the financial possibility of Bernie Sanders' policy proposals could come with only taxing millionaires and billionaires. You believe that the Department of Government officially achieves statistically significant savings in our federal budget. You believe that foreign aid is a significant part of our federal budget. You cannot tell what part of a billion a million is. You can't explain the difference between our federal deficit, our national debt, and the relationship between them. The reason I'm bringing these up, of course, is because this is what people are arguing about. They're arguing effectively out of ignorance. We face many challenges today, perhaps none greater than the inability of so many to simply understand what is being said to them. The inability of our citizens to correctly interpret reports and statistics, the inability to understand basic economic concepts that we all should have learned in high school. Intelligent, good, and caring people can argue over tariffs and their proper place as an economic and foreign policy tool, and well, we should. But we cannot argue over what they are, over who pays them, and over their historically demonstrated and proven economic effects. For many decades at Boston University, Dr. Isaac Asimov is a professor of biochemistry. You probably know him better as a writer, as he did write many science fiction books. He wrote many science books for lay people. In the course of his 72 years, he produced as author or editor more than 500 books. He popularized the use of the word robot, among other things. His works often featured scientific knowledge and ability as a saving human characteristic. 45 years ago, he wrote a piece for Newsweek. Now, for those of you who are younger, it was this thing that was called a magazine. It was about that thick, and it would come out every week with news in it, hence Newsweek. All right. It had a very broad circulation at one time. It was a cri de coeur, if you would, and he titled his essay, A Cult of Ignorance. Listen to Dr. Asimov in 1980. It is hard to quarrel with the ancient justification of the free press, America's right to know. It seems almost cruel to ask ingenuously, America's right to know what, please? Science? Mathematics? Economics? Foreign languages? None of these things, of course. In fact, one might well suppose that the popular feeling is that Americans are a lot better off without any of that tripe. There is a cult of ignorance in the United States, and there always has been. The strain of anti-intellectualism has been a constant thread winding its way through our political and cultural life, nurtured by the false notion that democracy means my ignorance is just as good as your knowledge. Politicians have routinely striven to speak the language of Shakespeare and Milton as ungrammatically as possible in order to avoid offending their audiences by appearing to have gone to school. Now we have a new slogan on the part of the obscurantists: don't trust the experts. Don't trust the experts is absolutely safe. Nothing, neither the passing of time nor exposure to information, will convert these shouters to experts in any subject that might conceivably be useful. All right then, forget my ingenuous question. America's right to know does not include knowledge of elitist subjects. America's right to know involves something we might express vaguely as what's going on. America has the right to know what's going on in the courts and Congress and the White House and industrial councils and the regulatory agencies and labor unions and the seats of the mighty generally. Very good, I'm for that too. But how are you going to let people know all that? Grant us a free press and a corps of independent and fearless investigative reporters, comes the cry, and we can be sure that the people will know. Yes, provided they can read. As it happens, reading is one of those elitist subjects I have been talking about, and the American public, by and large, in their distrust of experts and in their contempt for pointy-headed professors, can't read and don't read. If that is so, then how have Americans got the right to know? Grant that there are certain publications that make an honest effort to tell the public what they should know, but ask yourselves, how many actually read them? When he wrote this, he said, there are 200 million Americans who have inhabited schoolrooms at some time in their lives and who will admit that they know how to read, provided you promise not to use their names and shame them before their neighbors. But most decent periodicals believe that they are doing amazingly well. If they have circulation of 500,000, it may be that only 1% or less of Americans makes a stab at exercising their right to know. And if they try to do anything on that basis, they are quite likely to be accused of being elitists. I contend that the slogan, America's right to know, is a meaningless one when we have an ignorant population, and that the function of a free press is virtually zero when hardly anyone can read. Asimov was, I could say, highly condemnatory of our culture as it stood 45 years ago. I wonder what he would make of us today. Disputes of all kinds are splitting our nation apart. We have witnessed rising levels of political violence in our country that are a rough barometer of these divisions. Increasing numbers of people who are horribly mis- and underinformed, who feel powerless in a world that simply doesn't make sense to them. These are the people who are easily radicalized and even self-radicalized by the fire hose of bad information and an inability to understand the truth when it is presented to them. Enemy camps are easily created in the midst of our populace by those who choose to manipulate us. The rabbis long ago separated disputes into two main categories. Machloket shehi l'shem shamayim, a principled disagreement meant to ferret out the truth in service to a higher cause and in deference to God. Machloket she'ena l'shem shamayim, an unprincipled argument meant to amplify division, tear down the authority resting in expertise and knowledge, and empower rebellion. Every dispute that is for the sake of heaven will in the end endure. One that is not for the sake of heaven will not endure. So we read in Pirkei Avot, which is the controversy that is for the sake of heaven? Such was those between Hillel and Shammai, who respected each other and argued for the truth. And which is the controversy that is not for the sake of heaven? Such was the controversy of Korach and all his congregation, those who rebelled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness, simply to gain power for themselves. It's hard to imagine a starker division. As the rabbis put it, it's those who are loyal to God and the sacred responsibility we have to learn and to teach truth, and those whose energies are directed elsewhere. The commenter Menachem HaMeiri said this of those who choose to serve ignorance. Hillel and Shammai argued out of a desire to discover the truth, not out of grumpiness or just for the sake of winning an argument. But Korach and his followers came to attack Moses out of jealousy and a desire for victory. We choose between sacred service to God by upholding the truth or enlisting ourselves in service to a cult of ignorance, jealousy, and petty pride. Those who argue only to raise themselves up, this is not l'shem shamayim, in the name of heaven. Our ancient wisdom could not be clearer on the matter. The presumption of our sacred text is that each of us is endowed with the ability to learn right from wrong, to learn respect for that which is sacred and good. And I could not be in greater agreement. A gallon container in our refrigerators has the same capacity, whether filled with milk or nearly empty, and if you left just a little bit at the bottom and didn't get a new one, you know who you are. Our faith in the God-given human capacity to learn deserves the same certainty we have in a plastic jug. We can be filled up, each of us. We are charged with learning and teaching by God through the very mouth of Moses. We repeat our fealty to the sacred undertaking twice a day when we recite the Shema. And if there was ever a year to rededicate ourselves to this ideal, it is this one. We cannot pay obeisance to a cult of ignorance and expect good results. We cannot be satisfied to live in a society that allows too many to fall into the trap of ignorance or, God forbid, even celebrates it. 1,000 years ago, Bahi ibn Pakuda in Spain wrote this, "And these words which I command you this day shall be in your heart," which means cleave them to your heart and believe them in your inner being. Afterwards, God proceeded to the commandments of the limbs, our actions, which require both thought and action. You shall teach them to your children. This, so that if you don't have a child, you will not not mistakenly think that the commandment of verbally reading depends on having a child. God said, "V'dibarta bam," you shall speak in them, you. And afterwards continued, "You shall speak in them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way, when you lie down and when you rise up. Because the heart and the tongue are never prevented from fulfilling the duties which apply to them." Every person resisting ignorance by learning, by teaching, by speaking the truth is a primary Jewish activity in which every one of us can and should be engaged. Asimov closed his Poison Pen essay with a similar charge. We might begin by asking ourselves whether ignorance is so wonderful, after all, and whether it makes sense to denounce elitism. I believe that every human being with a physically, and again in 1980 he wrote normal, I would say, without profound intellectual disability, brain, can learn a great deal and be surprisingly intellectual. I believe that what we badly need is social approval of learning and social rewards for learning. We can all be members of the intellectual elite, and then, and only then, will a phrase like America's right to know, and indeed any true concept of democracy, have any meaning. Zil Gomor, go and learn and teach. Make this a year of pushing back against ignorance for the benefit of everyone.